Hello everybody, this is Josh with TFirearms. Today we're going to be taking a brief look at subsonic ammunition and the role it plays when used in conjunction with suppressors. We'll also be taking a look at some of the disadvantages and advantages subsonic ammunition has. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the rounds we're going to be using today. For testing today, we'll be using three different types of 22 long rifle bullets. The first one being the Remington Golden Bullet, which is a 40 grain projectile firing at 1,255 feet per second. This bullet is being used in this test to represent the average 22 long rifle round that the average firearms owner would use. The second bullet we'll be using is the Aguila Sniper Subsonic, and for some reason unknown to me, I have it in my head that this is the Super Sniper round, and will most likely mistakenly refer to it as such throughout this video. And if I do that, know that I'm actually referring to the Sniper Subsonic. This is a 60 grain bullet firing at 950 feet per second out of a 22 short shell, and it was designed specifically for suppressed application in firearms chambered for 22 long rifle. The final bullet we'll be shooting today is called the Aguila Calipri, and it's a rather unique round. It is a 22 grain lead projectile firing at the very low velocity of 420 feet per second, which is comparable to a BB gun or even an airsoft gun. The way it achieves such a low velocity is that it has no powder charge whatsoever, and it is fired solely by the ignition of the primer. So, with all that being said, let's take a look at the first suppressor we plan on using in this round of testing. For testing today, we will be using a basic 1022 pistol. This one is a shop custom. We fitted it into an Archangel chassis, modified it to accept a stabilizer brace, and added an 8-inch threaded barrel to it. Now, for the first round of testing, we're just going to be firing the rifle with no device attached to the barrel. And our testing format's going to follow the same pattern throughout all the different suppressors we use. Basically, what we'll be doing is firing 3 rounds of regular Remington Gold bullets, and then we are going to fire 3 rounds of the Aguila Subsonics, followed by 3 rounds of the Aguila Calipris. Now, the Aguila Calipris generally do have feeding issues in semi-automatic weapons, and they were designed to be ran in bolt-action 22s as well as 22 revolvers. So it's not a ding against the design of the bullet. Rather, we're using the bullet in a way it was not designed. And I fully expect we'll have some kind of feeding issues as we're going through this. That being said, let's go ahead and jump right into testing this first batch. Now, with that first test done, we've managed to establish a baseline of sorts, or some preliminary data that we can use to judge things off of going forward. Now, to add to that data, I'd like to point out that OSHA considers any type of noise over 130 decibels to be not hearing safe or to cause hearing damage. Now, there's a bunch of things you can get into with what's hearing safe and what isn't hearing safe. Me personally, I've got horrible tinnitus, so I'm probably not the best judge of that. But nonetheless, the actual official data from OSHA is that 130 decibels or higher is dangerous for your hearing. Now, as we noticed during the testing, the very noisy Oklahoma wind produces between 50 and 70 decibels depending on how fast it's gusting. Further, we were able to discover that me just running the action on the 1022 produces around 94 decibels on average. And to compare that to something that most people are familiar with, the average hand clap, or at least my average hand clap, like so, produces around 97 decibels. So with that information, we're able to move forward. And in that testing, we discovered that with no muzzle device or suppressor, we were producing 115 decibels for our Remington Gold bullets. What I found interesting was that our Aguila Super Snipers were also producing 115 decibels. And what I think is interesting about that is the fact that, at least to my ear, which we've already established is somewhat damaged, it seems to me that the Aguila Super Snipers are quieter. And I would guess that that's because that supersonic crack is taken out of there. So for lack of a better way to describe it, it seems like it's a smoother 115 decibels. But nonetheless, I was interested to see that our decibel reader reads them both as exactly the same volume. So that's something to kind of take into consideration. Now, the Aguila Calipris were registering at 99 decibels, which is pretty good, especially considering we weren't silenced at all. Now, moving forward, our next suppressor we're going to test is this quiet bore, what they call a Form 1 Kit Suppressor. Now, quiet bore originally made solvent traps, and then kind of as the ATF started cracking down on solvent traps, they changed their business model, and now they produce what they call Form 1 kits. And basically what happens is you fill out a Form 1, you submit the paperwork to the ATF. Once it gets approved, Quiet Bore will send you an entire kit, and then you can finish it out yourself. Sort of similar to the way an 80% lower receiver works. Now, this is a direct thread suppressor, so we're going to thread it on, and it is designed specifically for 22s. And I'm really curious to compare it to an actual factory suppressor and see what we're getting as far as performance differences, or the lack thereof, between a homemade suppressor and a factory-made suppressor. So let's get into it. All right, so we got some more interesting data. As we can see, the suppressor does make a difference. So we went from 115 on our Remington Gold Dots unsuppressed, and with the Quiet Bore 22 suppressor, we were able to get 101 decibels. So that's a pretty significant reduction. And again, we're talking, compared to our hand clap, only a couple decibels louder, which again is fairly impressive. Now with the Aguila Super Snipers, we got 100 decibels, so a little bit quieter than the Remingtons, but again, not significantly so. And I'm still surprised by it because, again, to my ear, it sounds significantly quieter, but the decibel reader says it isn't. So, interesting. Now with the Aguila Calipris, we were getting 96, which is a huge reduction and really surprising because at this point, we're shooting a bullet that is far less noisy. Well, not far less, but a little bit less than a hand clap, which, again, I mean, we're approaching Hollywood quiet out of a suppressor, which is pretty impressive. However, as we noticed, this is 2 tests in a row where we've had issues with the Aguila Calipris not chambering that final round. And I suspect it has something to do with the magazine design, not necessarily the bullet. But again, these bullets weren't designed to be ran out of semi-automatic rifles. You'll also notice that I am having to manually eject every round, and that's because there's no gunpowder in the cartridge whatsoever, so it's not enough to cycle. And I can barely see it kind of out of the corner of my eye. The charging handle will boop just a little bit and not go any further than that. So that's one of the limitations and drawbacks to any type of subsonic round. You'll have feeding issues, generally speaking. For example, when I was first started shooting the Aguila Super Snipers, I had feeding issues, and I was having to heavily lubricate this 1022 to make it function with the Super Snipers. So those are considerations you have to take into account anytime you're running subsonic ammunition, is you're probably going to have some feeding issues, and that's due to the reduced powder and charge that's being utilized to cycle your action. So it's a consideration along with the loss of velocity, but you're getting the advantage of quiet bullets. So moving on, our next suppressor we'll be using is again a direct thread, and this one is an Oss Rad 22. Now this is a factory-made suppressor, and I'm really curious to see how it stacks up against the homemade quiet bore one. So let's go see how it does. we got some really interesting data out of that test that I wasn't expecting as well, and that's kind of what I'm enjoying about doing this testing, is instead of going, oh well, it sounds like, we're actually getting some measurable data that we can actually look at and analyze and kind of compare head to head. So it's pretty exciting for me personally, just as a gun nerd, looking at all of this as opposed to just playing guessing games. So with the Oss Rad 22, we were getting 99 decibels on average out of our Remington gold bullets. What's really surprising about that is out of the Aguila Super Snipers, we were getting 100 decibels. So those were actually those were actually louder than our Remington gold dots, which I did not expect at all. And I mean, we're talking about 1 decibel, but the part of the reason why we're doing 3 shots is to kind of try to eliminate any outliers. And I wish I could do way more shots, but it's 2021 and we have an ammo crisis in America, so I can't. But nonetheless, it's an attempt to try and be as scientific as possible about this, and as much as a redneck shooting bullets at trash in his backyard can be. Nonetheless, interesting data. Now with the Aguila Calipris, we were getting 97 decibels, which again surprised me because that was louder than what we got out of the quiet bore. So we saw better performance with the Subsonic bullet, similar, or well, it's 100 decibels and 100 decibels, so exactly the same performance out of our Subsonics. And then out of our Calibris, it was actually louder than the quiet bore. So this kind of goes to demonstrate, much like guns, whatever suppressor you end up running, you're going to want to tailor your load or your bullet that you're using specific to that suppressor. Play around with stuff, figure out which one works best or which one does what you want the best while still running reliably in your firearm. Now, these next 2 suppressors are actually going to be 5.56 suppressors. This one is our this one is our Griffin Armament Gp5. And generally speaking, 5.56 suppressors have a slightly larger hole than what you would see out of a 22 suppressor. And that's for a bunch of different reasons. But what we're trying to figure out with this testing is, one, does a larger suppressor make a big difference or not? Because, conventional wisdom is bigger is always better. I mean, that's how we do things in America, or at least across the border down in Texas, that's how they do things. Now, the other thing I'm interested in testing is seeing if the larger bore allows more gas to escape and creates a louder sound signature. So let's go take a look and see what actually happens. Okay, so that was pretty cool. We were able to discover that the larger suppressor actually did end up being quieter. All of our bullets ended up being under 100 decibels each. We had the Remington Golds at 99 decibels, the Super Snipers at 98, and the Calibris back down to 96 like they were with the Quiet Bore 22 kit, which is pretty cool. And again, we're in comparing these suppressors head to head with each other, we're seeing single-digit changes in a lot of cases. So really, there's not a significant difference, but there is a very minute difference. And what I was kind of wondering myself, because these larger 5.56 cans are obviously heavier, whereas these 22 cans are minusculely light compared. What difference did it make? Are they cutting corners to create a lighter suppressor for a 22, or have they kind of optimized the kind of weight to quiet ratio out of these suppressors? And in my opinion, it seems like they absolutely have, but we're not done yet. So we've got, this is a quiet bore, so another homemade can. This one's what they call their 32 caliber can. They make a shorter 5.56 one that's, I believe this one's about 8 inches, whereas the 5.56 one's a hair over 6, if I remember correctly. However, this one has been bored out specifically for me to do redneck backyard testing on for 5.56. So we've got essentially as big of a can as we can get. We've bored it out for 5.56, and we're going to see, you know, definitively once and for all if bigger really is better. And as you've noticed, all of these cans are direct thread, and I do want to point out, you'll notice the threads on here are very, very small. We've got about 5 threads total. If your gunsmith threads your barrel and only gives you 5 threads, you should fire him, absolutely. The reason this one was done that way is because it was intended for testing, and as you can see, I was able to slip it on very easy and take it off very easy, so it's more of a convenience thing. And if I ever do decide to, you know, use this for something more important than backyard testing, I would definitely cut the threads a lot better and a lot longer, but it serves its purpose. Another thing I would like to point out, like I said earlier, these 5.56 cans are significantly heavier. And I mean, in this case, I would almost say this can is heavier than the rifle itself. So you have a significant drawback with all steel 5.56 cans versus normally aluminum 22 cans. So let's go find out if bigger really is better. Okay, so some even more interesting data came out of that. We were able to see that, in this case, bigger isn't necessarily better. Our quiet bore bored out to 5.56 in a 30 cal can ended up producing 102 decibels on average for our Remington Golds. With the Super Snipers, we got 99, and with our Aguila Calipris, we managed to get our lowest yet with 94 decibels, which is lower than a hand clap and on par with the cycling of the action, so that's fairly impressive. Now the issues we were plagued with the Calibris throughout the videos means that we didn't really get a good spread of data on them, but I feel fairly confident that the results are on average. And speaking of on average, that's kind of what we're seeing out of all of these suppressors. I mean, we're within single digit numbers comparing one to the other, and that was kind of something I was interested in discovering, comparing these suppressors to each other. Is, do bigger suppressors make a difference, more space, more baffles? And at least based off of this testing, it doesn't seem to be the case. So that being said, were I personally not a dealer or a manufacturer looking to get a suppressor as quickly as possible, the Form 1 suppressors from Quiet Bore are very attractive. And I know at the shop we're seeing on average 15 to 30 day turnaround times from when we submit the packets for the Form 1 packages to the ATF approving them and us being able to send out the kit to the new owner. And I will, you know, in the interest of full disclosure, like to say that I am a dealer for all of these different brands of suppressors as well as Quiet Bore. So yes, I do have a bit of a vested interest in seeing them be successful, but I would like to point out that, you know, I wasn't hiding the decibel reader or anything. I try to be as honest and transparent in gathering this data for you because I believe in running a business that's ran honestly. So in a lot of respects, these tests that we're doing and this data that we're gathering is really more for me to be able to provide a very informed opinion for my customers, and a non-biased one as well. You know, I make money either way off of these suppressors, so I don't have to shill one versus the other. They're ultimately all going to make me money, and my business model isn't based solely on suppressors. And I'm not sponsored by any of them or anything like that. So, you know, in the sake of transparency, I do want to mention that I do deal these suppressors. But I personally don't feel like it impacts my opinion one way or the other. The reason why I personally would probably advocate for the Form 1 suppressor is solely because it's a Form 1 suppressor. One, it's a little bit cheaper than the production ones. Two, you get it a lot faster, and I know most people are like me, they hate to wait for things. So that's what that is. Now, we weren't seeing big variances between these different bullets, and I suspect that's because we were using 22 bullets. 22 bullets are tiny bullets with a tiny amount of powder, and just by the nature of their design, they're not going to produce a lot of noise in general, which makes them excellent candidates for suppression. But it does make gathering data like this kind of difficult. In the future, we're probably going to do some different caliber testing and try to get more of a spread in between our tests. But I hope I was able to demonstrate fairly clearly that there is somewhat of a difference between subsonics and supersonic bullets, and kind of what that is. And really the big difference is you're getting lower feet per second, you're getting bullets that are more prone to having cycling issues, but you're getting quieter as a result. That being said, it's not so significantly quiet to be a deal breaker one way or the other. It is enough to make a difference, but not enough to make a ton of difference. And a lot of it's going to depend on what type of gun you're running, what type of suppressor you're running, and how you're planning to shoot it. So all of these factors stack to either build you a super quiet gun or a rifle or a pistol, or to maybe achieve a different goal. And kind of like our last video where we were discussing flash suppression, in many cases, for example, military application, that's the primary goal of a suppressor, not necessarily noise reduction. So these are all factors to take into consideration. The purpose of these videos is to help you as a customer who probably isn't going to be able to shoot suppressors as much as somebody like me can. That way you go into the buying experience forewarned and forearmed. I thought it would be fun as a final test and more as a way of just gathering some additional data to go ahead and shoot some supersonic 5.56 ammunition out of this AR-15 with an Oss HXQD suppressor mounted to it. And there's really no purpose behind this test other than to just kind of demonstrate a little bit of the differences sound-wise between a 5.56 bullet or a rifle bullet as opposed to a 22 long rifle bullet. And really just to give you some additional data to kind of consider as you're going into making a suppressor purchase or something of that nature. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I do kind of blow through this test fairly fast, and there's no reason for that other than me. I like to shoot fast and eat. Well, never mind. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you some information to kind of consider and some things to think about. Eventually, I would like to revisit this topic and shoot some of these exact same bullets suppressed into gelatin or something of that nature, and kind of try to discover the differences terminal ballistics wise that you get out of higher velocity versus lower velocity and subsonics versus supersonics. So you'll have even more data to help make more informed decisions as you go into either purchasing a suppressor or potentially not purchasing a suppressor. I would like to thank everybody for their support, both for the business and for this channel. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you a lot more informative videos in the future. So stay tuned, and thanks again.